What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mack here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed. Lives are transformed. Just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Soulful Hunter Podcast. You know me, your host, Johnny Mack. I'm joined by an awesome human being, my fellow neighbor, Ian Padron.
Great to be here again.
For the second time.
Repeat guest. I feel honored.
Dude, it's been a while, and it's time to make it just that much better.
Yeah, we've been talking about it, and just been busy with everything. But actually, it's probably a good thing because now we have even more stuff to talk about. Right?
I feel like there's so much to talk about. We just got done mounting a scope on a gun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice, beautiful Kelbley's Coda action, or actually Atlas action, Coda rifle, 6.5 Creedmoor. We're going to take it out on a bear hunt and the rest of the season.
It's a good-looking rifle.
Yeah, really excited about it. Big.
That thing is pretty sharp.
Thank you.
It's a sweet gun. I'm not jealous. I'm a little jealous.
I love it. Well, Ian, I want to have you on talk about what you do for your scouting routines.
Yeah.
You're a huge. Actually, before we continue, I'm going to have you pull that down off your nose a little bit more. That way we don't get the.
Sound like that kid from Hey Arnold.
Yeah,
just breathing.
Yeah, the heavy breather.
Stage 5 mouth breather over here.
It happens sometimes, man. I recorded a podcast the other day, and I sent it off to a guy. It was for Western Contours, Reflections episode. And I started listening to it, and I was like, I don't know what is going on, but I was like, in between. I was like, I don't remember recording like that, but sometimes the microphone picks up weird things.
Yeah. Dude, now that I have it moved, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's so much better.
Yeah.
I can't hear myself breathing anymore.
When you can hear yourself breathe, you know you're breathing heavy. Okay, Ian, you came out to Washington specifically to hunt.
Yeah, and fish. Yep.
Yeah, you're a Wisconsin boy, and you're like, you felt the call of the wild on your soul.
Yeah, 100%.
And there's only one place to go.
Yeah.
State of Washington.
Exactly. Seattle, downtown.
Right in the heart of what do they even call that?
Chaz.
Chaz, yeah.
Yep, that's where dreams go to die.
Well, they were autonomous,
It's
so.
true. It's true.
Okay, so getting on topic, it's always fun shooting the shiz with all of you. Dude, you came out to Washington because you were like, I want to hunt and I want to hunt the backcountry. You're a huge student of the game, student of hunting and
sure.
everything about it. You've read a lot of books, you've done a lot of research, and I feel like you are one of those guys that it's really fun to hear what you have to say and your perspective and take on things. So, wanted to bring you on, talk a little bit about preseason scouting.
Yeah, for sure. One of my favorite things.
Yeah, you're good at it. You also don't have any children, so you're a lot more free to just be like,
Oh,
I'm taking off.
For sure. Yeah, these are the good old days when it comes to being able to do what I want when I want, especially with the job, Can usually take off in the middle of the week when everyone else is working. Get up in the mountains for a few days and see things that other people can't. So,
and you've already had some great encounters this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Seen some bears in some new spots, which is really cool. And then we also have a couple bucks already locked down. So chain them up to a tree, and hopefully they're still there on September 15th.
Right? I ran in on turkey hunting. I got on a beautiful bachelor group of whitetail bucks.
Sweet.
And the biggest one in the group was already quite wide, much wider than the ears. And sprouting.
And that was like 3 weeks ago. Right?
Yeah.
Last week in a turkey season?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's probably going to be a big boy.
Very big.
If 3 weeks ago he was looking big already. Yeah, I always say, I'm always looking for mule deer, but you can tell it's a 4-by the 4th of July. So that's typically like by the 4th of July, if you go up, you can usually tell what's going on. I mean, they still haven't finished out, but the frame is there. You can tell, for the most part, what's going on with that buck.
I saw a 4-by this weekend.
Yeah.
Coming back from my scouting trip on Highway 2, just outside of Wenatchee, off the side of the highway. A beautiful velvet buck, 4x4.
Oh,
Short forks.
Yeah.
Because it's starting, but.
Yeah, those valley bucks are cool. You see them down there in the orchards and stuff, running along Highway 2 between Wenatchee and Cashmere. It's a cool area.
Yeah. So take us through some of your scouting routine. Do you scout specifically only for mule deer, and then if you come across black bears, you just make a mental note, or do you scout based off a season progression, like your number one target animal or number two, or this is the first hunt?
Yeah.
What are you doing? How are you identifying areas that you want to go into? What are you looking for? I just got back from a scouting trip that I saw the most amount of deer tracks I've ever seen and giant buck tracks. I didn't see a single deer, and it was old burn, hard to glass in. So like a still Robbie Denning, if he heard this podcast and he saw where I was at, he would want to come hunt that location.
Oh yeah, ambush set up with his muzzle loader.
Yes,
the Robbie Denning special.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I think so. For me, like in terms of what do I actually scout for, mule deer scouting for me was the segue into bear scouting. Right, where when I first moved out here, I had zero interest in bear hunting. Stupid in hindsight. Should have been all about it from day one. But in the meantime, when I was focusing on mule deer, then obviously you see lots of bears. So then your brain starts forming pathways where you're like, oh, well, this is an area that looks very similar to places I've seen bears. And this is what it looks like on Google Earth when I look back at it. And then you can actually start looking for bears too, right? This is what a blueberry patch or a huckleberry patch looks like on Google Earth. And once you can kind of cross-check like what something looks like electronically versus places you've actually seen in person, then the world is your oyster. It's so uncommon for me now to find a spot that looks promising on X or Google Earth, whatever, that isn't actually promising then when I go there, right? Because you know that it looks exactly like your top 3 spots elsewhere, right? So that's kind of how I went about it. Just kind of started stacking things on top of all the terrain I was seeing with my mule deer scouting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, are you scouting more south-facing slopes, north-facing slopes, transition areas, saddles? Like, what are you looking for when you're identifying a spot?
Yeah. So some of the best advice I was ever given early on. I mean, I was that guy. Just reached out to everybody who I thought was like doing things in the backcountry that I wanted to be able to emulate, right? And the vast majority of them were over the top awesome for giving me fantastic pointers. And one of the best pointers that was reiterated multiple times by multiple guys who are 10 times better hunters than me. Um, it's always the focus, right? You need food, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and you need shelter, and you need water. Like it's really that simple, right? So the shelter thing, though, is the thing that's not quite as straightforward. What does that mean? It means different things for different bucks in different places. That could be a burn that has a ton of deadfall. So those deer can get locked up in there where they feel really safe. It can be avalanche chutes up in the alpine because predators and humans don't want to go up into that stuff and they can't really run through it very quickly to chase them. Um, it could be even just like a really steep hillside, right, where nothing else is really going to come out there. You see deer that'll be bedded down underneath these ledges where it's like, why is that deer out there? Well, because he's safe. So for me, it was looking for food, so really green hillsides, looking for water, whether there's a creek down in the bottom or a lake up top, and then figuring out what shelter actually meant for a deer,
Yeah.
right? They're not out in the mountains living in cabins, right? They need a very specific set of, in quotes, shelter
Yeah,
needs.
they're not sitting around a table playing poker with their buddies and being like,
Exactly.
"God, these hunters."
Yeah,
What a,
their version of shelter is different than what like you and I would look for
yeah.
in the mountains.
I
So
want to add a little bit to this. This is a blacktail experience that I had, but I was hiking on the beach of Western Washington, out on the peninsula, and part of this trail, you actually have to hike the beach and time it with the tide. And I came up on this beautiful log, and I wanted to stand up on this log to get a good look at the surrounding area. I looked down, and there was a beautiful buck bedded on the water side of this log,
dang,
right there.
tan in his cheeks.
Yeah, because and like you said, that what we think is cover is not always what they use as cover.
Yep.
The point of that being is that he had the water in front of him and the beach in front of him. He could see what was happening, and he had this giant dead tree blocking his back.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, that's a really good thing to talk about is covering their back. Um, God, early on when I was first going up in the mountains looking for deer, I don't think that like if you would have told me then, like, hey, deer really like rocks, I would have been like, okay. Um, Not necessarily believed it, right? Because why would they like rocks? What's up there? It's not like it's just overflowing with high nutrient feed. There's not a lot of water up there. Um, but after a few trips, I mean, you'd be glassing up does and fawns kind of down in the tree line in the timber where you would expect to see bucks because there's a lot of feed down there, a lot of water. And then you get bored and you just kind of flick up the binos into the scree fields and the cliffs. And sure as shit, there are bucks up there. And they're tucked into the nastiest stuff. They've got these little beds dug out and they'll push themselves up so their back is covered, typically up against something that's upright, vertical. And they'll lay right at the base of that. And usually there's just a little bit of feed up there for them. And they'll stay up there all day. So after that, I started looking, where can a deer cover its backside? Where can they get up high and have their cover their six? Where can they do that? And that for me was like a huge eye opener. Deer, especially big bucks, love cliffs. They love rocks because they can just push themselves up there and you'd never expect.
Right, and mountain lion's not going to come jump down on them.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if they're down in the timber with those does and fawns, I mean, anything and everything that wants to kill a deer could be 10 yards away. And if the wind isn't right, they wouldn't know. So, yeah, somewhere where they can smell and see and hear a lot better. I think that's a good thing to consider in terms of where to find bucks. Where can they go to take advantage and leverage all of the crazy senses that they have? That's where they're going to be.
Yeah. Are you using a lot of glassing techniques to turn up deer when you're scouting, or are you more just trusting the tracks and they're leading 1,000 feet down into a draw and you're like, okay, well, it's hot out and they're going to be down in there?
Yep. Yeah, so for me, especially during the summertime, the scouting window is so small. I mean, especially when it's, July getting into August, it's so stinking hot. It's like that first, sometimes 15, 30 minutes, and that's it, where the deer are out moving around before, boom, they're bedded. It also depends just on your exposure, right? Typically, I mean, you'll see deer literally move with the shadow across a hillside. Like as the sun touches that spot, there's no more deer. It's just the shadow pushes them back into the timber. So you really have to figure out how to use the sun. But for the most part, like you're asking, yeah, first like 15, 30 minutes of the morning, and then that 15 to 30 minutes before it gets dark in the summertime. Those are the hot spots. You won't see a deer all day if you're looking at all of the most bucky spots on the hillside. But then, geez, right before it gets dark or right after it gets light, it's like a Disney movie sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why for me, you gotta have other stuff to do when you're scouting too. Like if you go back and you're just gonna be sitting behind your glass all day in the summer, you're gonna lose your mind. But if you go up and you're like, okay, I'm gonna try to bag a couple peaks, or I'm gonna take a fishing rod along.
I pounded morel mushrooms this last weekend.
Yeah, it makes it a whole lot more fun because otherwise there's nothing to do from like 8:30 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. It's too stinking hot.
And it's hot. If you're not by a lake, you're not swimming or anything like that.
So sitting up on a cliff where you might during hunting season where it's cooler and the deer are out moving around, it's just not a good use of your time. You're not being efficient. So another thing you can do, some guys are hell bent on being active in terms of actively scouting when they're up in the mountains. Middle of the day is a fantastic time to go beat some timber. Find some tracks. Like see, okay, I didn't see any deer this morning. Have they used this area in the past? Jump down into some of the little patches of timber. See if you can find rubs, beds, any sort of old sign.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes that's pretty valuable too because you can't see those fine details with your glass.
Yeah, I got a really good tip from a guy. And he was saying, this is a dude who's killed a lot of big animals and under the radar kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like people don't know him, but he's got the animals to prove it.
Yep.
He was telling me, he was like, because he's also a trapper. So he's always, snowmobiling and driving these mountain roads.
Right.
And he says, anytime I come across a place with heavy animal use, I mark it, and then I go and I scratch out all the tracks. And then I carry on. And then either by the time I return or the next day when I'm checking my traps or doing these things, if I see fresh tracks again, it's like, okay, now that's 2 in a row.
Yep.
Now that's 3 in a row, or however you want to do it. But I was like, that's really good advice because so often it's like, oh, there's a track. Well, how old is a track?
Yeah. Well, that's actually, geez, there's so many different levels to scouting, right? Like, that's one thing after reading Robbie's book where I was like, holy cow. Tracking is so important because just like you said, it's overwhelming. If you get into an area that has a lot of deer, there are like thousands of tracks at times going every which direction. When you're first starting out, you don't know the difference between a buck track and a doe track and so a deer that's running, a deer that's walking. you just can't tell what's what. It's completely overstimulating. But if you take your time and slow down and you put the time in, all of a sudden it starts becoming a little bit of a puzzle that you can piece together. You learn what a big blocky buck track looks like. You learn what it means when you see dew claws sinking into ground. Look for moisture to be able to tell if it's, recent or not. All of those things that typically I think a lot of people just like, oh, it's a deer track.
Right.
But a guy who's up there to actually put the puzzle together is like, all right, this is a track. It's pretty old, pretty dusty. Doesn't have a lot of fine detail. Doesn't look a whole lot bigger than my thumb. Move on, right? Versus, holy cow, that was a heavy deer. You can tell by the angle that he went in with those dew claws in there, those front hooves all splayed out. All of a sudden, that's like, okay, this is an area we need to spend more time.
Right.
So, yeah, that's another really important part that I don't think a lot of people think about.
Do you ever, when you look at these tracks, you're like, okay, where are they coming from and where are they going?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then what is the wind doing at this time of day?
Yep. So that's again, it's like next level stuff. You start looking for deer. You're stoked, like you're on top of the world when you see your first deer. It's like, okay, I put the puzzle together.
Yep.
And then you realize you have to try to kill one in their house. Like it's what I always try to explain it to people. Like I come back, and some of my buddies who don't hunt, they're always like, dude, you have all these pictures of these huge bucks. Why didn't you shoot one? Well, dude, it's like if you're looking into someone's window, like at night, they got the lights on, and then you try to go into their house, but then they turn all the lights off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a huge house, and you've never been in there before. You've just seen one little bit of it, like through the window from a mile away.
Yep.
Now you have to go into their giant house and try to find them in the dark. So it's like such a small piece of the puzzle to see a deer. Now you have to figure out, okay, of the 5 or 10 escape routes this buck has, which ones do they use in certain wind conditions? Which ones do they use if they hear something from this direction versus this direction? Those bucks are so cagey in the high country,
Mm-hmm.
and they're so well oiled in their ways. It's like they kind of remind me of robots.
Yeah.
Like they'll come out of the same area every day. They'll go back into the same area every day, literally like they're on tracks. But then you throw any sort of wrench into the operation and your scent gets in there, or you kick a rock. They just go into escape mode, and it's like it's all pre-calculated. There's no random act for those deer. It's like, okay, heard a noise, boom, I'm going this way, and then they're gone. It's so crazy.
It's wild because, as a parent, as a father, a husband, it's like, okay, if stuff happens, our family has a plan. Like, okay, rally the troops, go here, do this, do that. Not everyone's like that, but I like to actually have some cerebral awareness of surroundings. We like to apply our humanistic traits to animals.
Yeah.
We're just dealing with instincts, but they know their terrain so well because that's all they ever do.
Yep.
That there's no confusion. They know, and it's so interesting. I think what's his name? Roe Hunting Resources. What's his? He's more of an elk hunter, but he talks about this. He's like, well, have you ever closed your eyes or turned off all the lights in your house and then tried to make it into your bedroom? He's like, you can do it without hurting yourself. Why? Because you know your environment that well.
Yep.
It's like that's what it's like hunting these animals.
Yeah, it really is. And people who hear that are like, oh, they're just deer. No, they're not just deer. Like these things have evolved, for thousands and thousands of years to escape predators.
Yeah.
Humans included. And they have all of the tricks up their sleeve. So, when you're up in the high country and you're scouting, that's why there's so much more that you need to be looking for than deer. It's like, where are the deer moving? Where are they coming from and where are they going to? How much time do they spend in each spot? Where are they feeding? Where are they bedding? All of that stuff will put you in such a better position because you have data points.
Mm.
So when you're in hunting season and you watch a buck come out of a patch of trees you've seen him come out of before, you know what he's going to do. You know where he's headed to. You can cut him off. You know where he wants to get back to at the end of the day, so you can be there. I think that's kind of like how you get on the next level of finding mature animals consistently,
Mm-hmm.
is learning how to be a really effective observer.
Yes. I also want to add to this is Ryan Lampers was telling me this because I asked him one day, I was like, dude, it seems like you're always killing giant animals, really mature ones, and you're consistently doing this. I was like, yes, there's a certain amount of skill set that goes into it. I go, but how much of it is based off of just how much time you give yourself to hunt?
Yeah,
And
that's
he
like all of it.
and he was like, well, I don't go into a hunt unless I can get at least minimum 5 days, and that's maybe for a bear, but at least 7 days for deer or elk.
Yep.
I was like, he's like, in that much time you can learn the environment. You don't have to kill day 1, 2, 3. All of a sudden you pattern an animal in that amount of time. It's like, okay. And I remember watching him, watching him. It's funny I'm saying that. He did like an IG story, Instagram story update, like day by day, and he had posted these pictures of this giant buck. And he's like, he's not in a killable position. He's not in a killable position. I'm not going to rush it. He'll mess up. He'll mess up. I think it was like day 8. He messed up
Yep.
and he killed that buck. And I'm like, okay. The difference is that the majority of hunters don't have that time.
Right.
That they're not actually out there watching these animals, learning their environments for 8 days, a week, or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of them is a weekend warrior. So how can we close that gap for the weekend warrior to the Ryan Lampers of the world and be like, okay, best case scenario is what summer scouting.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency, right? And I think if you ask Ryan, he'd probably tell you the same thing. It's about being efficient with your time. So if you only have a couple weekends during the summer, be strategic with them. Be like, okay, this is a spot that looks fantastic. It is in a big migration corridor, so there's going to be bucks passing through here, regardless of what kind of weather's happening. Like I was telling you the other day, like when you're looking for spots, you want to basically just follow creeks, follow drainages, because that's what deer follow. They're running ridges and they're running rivers to get to and from summer and winter range. So your job is just find, okay, what are the most food dense, shelter dense areas along this corridor that I can be at? Spend your time there. If you only have a few weekends, spend your time there. So all of the work that guys who can hunt for 7 to 10 days do in the first few days of a hunt, try to take care of that ahead of time before you show up. And then be strategic with your game plan, right? While you're scouting. Okay, I'm going to map out shooting positions. Where do I have good vantage points to shoot into where these deer are? What are the yardages so that if something comes up, you already have things pre-mapped? I mean, I do that in all of my spots. I've got yardages memorized from different outcroppings from different spots in the basin, just because oftentimes when a deer comes out, it happens so fast. The last thing you want to do is be fumbling around with a rangefinder, fumbling around with your Strelock app on your phone. All of those things, if they're done during the summertime, it's like you optimizing your efficiency so that you show up. It's like you're a football coach. You practice the play all week so that when it's game time, you just run the play, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's it. Run in the play. Make it like it's real life. When you're up there scouting, you're also hunting.
Do you think some people are overthinking this?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what's crazy, right? Like everything that I just said and talk about how smart and how cagey deer are. At the end of the day, it is so simple. Like guys who spend a lot of time in the mountains kill a lot of deer and kill a lot of bears.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to overanalyze everything. You don't have to have 20 spots scouted out. You don't have to have a rifle that shoots 1,200 yards. Like you just have to know an area really well. And if you know an area really well and spend enough time there, you'll consistently kill animals.
Right.
100%.
I've always wondered, I'm a huge bear hunter. Like that's That's my number one animal. I love shooting bears every year. But I've always shot West Side bears.
Yeah.
Well, except the spring bear, but that's springtime is springtime. They eat grass, they eat fresh growth. I've always started to dive into this depth of like, okay, well, the berry fields in the eastern parts of the state aren't very easily, you don't come by them very well. So what are these bears eating in the fall? And so on this last scouting trip, fresh bear tracks, fresh bear scat. And I took a stick and I started poking around in it. And it was all a bunch of these little tiny, look like huckleberry leaves, little tiny round things.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So they're eating that as the fresh growth. I was like, what is this? Where's this plant at? So I started like walking around, and it turns out like it's exactly where I was seeing all the tracks at. That bush was right there, but we're just passing by it so quickly. And this is like the hiker mentality versus the hunter, the tracker mentality, is that each step is revealing something to you. You know, it's so hard. It's like if we could split our eyes and have one eye up and one eye down, that'd be ideal, right? So we see what's ahead of us and see if we can spot any animals at the same time. Where are we and what are we doing?
Yep.
That is one of the things that I love combo scouting. So I went mule deer scouting, also knowing that come October I might have a bear tag in my pocket still.
Yeah.
So what bushes, what berries? You ever heard of kinnikinnick?
Heard of it. I think if you like showed me a picture, I wouldn't be able to pick it out of a lineup.
So that's what bears. It's also known as bearberry, and I'm going to show you a picture right now because I had to identify it, and this is the leaves
that the bear was
eating.
Yeah.
There it is. Take a look at that.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, that's super common over there.
Yeah.
And I would never have known that name. Just know the look of it.
There you go. So that's what bears eat.
Yeah, I believe it. Over that, especially, you get further and further east, like out of the Cascades proper, they don't have berries like mountain blueberries and huckleberries.
Mm-hmm.
It's all kind of like those modified pseudo berries.
Right.
And acorns and stuff like that.
All the stuff that our parents probably said, "Oh, don't eat that. It's probably dangerous."
Yeah. Bears are pounding it,
Right.
growing huge on it for sure. Yeah, 100%. No, the bear thing is interesting, right? Because they're such capable animals that are able to adapt to multiple environments.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like your scouting approach in lowland Western Washington versus near the PCT versus down by the Columbia River. There's bears in all of those places, doing very different things, living in very different places. So it's a challenge to try to have like a one size fits all recommendation on how to get into them, but it makes it a whole lot more fun because it's like learning how to scout for a new species in each of their locations.
Yes.
Makes it a lot more interactive as a hunter.
Yeah.
Because you learn something new.
Yeah, you grow your book. You're not getting stagnant and stale.
Yeah, for sure. And then it really is more than half the fun. I mean, some of my favorite spots in Washington, still love them, but you get to a point where you have it so well patterned that it's really, it's more transactional than it is about like deeply gratifying to go up there.
Yeah.
Because you're not learning as much. I mean, there's never going to be a hunt where you don't learn anything, but I think it definitely drops off. Like, you learn so much your first couple times into a new spot. I mean, it's like information overload.
Yeah.
But after you have it dialed in, you kind of know what to expect, which is the goal. But then you also hit this really weird point where like, this is too straightforward. I got to go challenge the skill set elsewhere.
Yeah, it's like when you get really good at a video game, you're like, okay, I'm over it now.
Yep.
Because there's no challenge to it.
Yeah.
There's always a challenge. Don't get us wrong.
Right.
But that's exactly it. I went to a location this last year that I don't want to go back to until I take my kids. Because I know it. I know what it will produce, and where they show up and at what time. And
Yeah.
it's great. I'm ready to expand my horizons. I feel like I'm a good hunter. I'm not a great hunter until I can replicate the success I've had there and put it everywhere. That's when I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, if you wanted to go kill a deer, kill a bear every single year, I think that's relatively straightforward to do. But that's, it quickly loses its allure. You're like, yeah, but it would be really cool to try to combine this with this and then also try to kill a bear off the back of it in this basin because I've looked at it. And I don't think anyone's ever been back there. So I should at least try it.
Yeah.
That adds so much more fuel to the fire to go scout and go hunt.
So here's this talking about that bachelor group of whitetail bucks that I saw earlier. So last spring I drew a spring bear tag, and on that spring bear hunt, I found a turkey location, and I found this beautiful little, I'm gonna call it a cut. It's like a little valley bowl with, it's timber company land, so there's roads on either side of it. Not very big, about a couple acres. And I would consistently see does in this every single time. And so that was in May, June. And I was like, okay, I didn't fill my regular season deer tag. I know exactly where I'm going for late season. And I went in November, parked at the same gate for my spring bear hunt, and hiked in to this meadow. And the minute we got there, we got on deer, and boom, minutes later, shot my buck.
That's optimizing efficiency right
Yes.
there. And there's really nothing as rewarding as like that's the play.
Yeah.
All right, Johnny, you're in. Run the play. And it works out perfectly.
Yeah.
That's freaking cool.
It was awesome. And we still didn't even get to the real money hole that we wanted to.
Yeah.
We packed out. we butchered the animal, and then I was like, okay, Tony, do you want to keep going in or do we want to pack out and then we'll come back in tonight or tomorrow?
Right.
And he's like, let's pack out. It's dumping snow, freezing cold, hands were, shivering, all that stuff. Touching a dead animal, so everything's wet and then refreezing. And
Yeah.
so we packed out, but the snow got so deep that he actually started developing a pretty weird knee issue. And we tried hiking back in, and he was like, this really hurts. And so we ended up not going in, and he didn't get a deer on that trip when I know that we could have turned up another buck.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that with that weather and bucks work in the area, there's more of them in there.
So whitetail deer, you know anything? You have any experience with those? Being a Wisconsin boy, is that bachelor group of bucks going to be in that same area?
Yeah, so when I was in Wisconsin, I didn't know a whole lot about deer hunting aside from just talking to my buddies. But from what I've learned the last 2 seasons, I've spent a bunch of time in North Idaho and then Northwest Montana helping my brother-in-law, and then also doing my own hunt this past year. Learned a lot about big timber, like West Coast whitetails. And I think there's some pretty marked differences between like your Midwest cornfield whitetails and the ones out here. The one thing though that I believe is similar, so in northern Wisconsin, big timber, like basically the top third of the state up to Lake Superior. It's all national forest. Really cool country. Pretty healthy population of deer, not as healthy as it used to be because of the wolf issue back there. But what you learn is the deer density is relatively low. The deer quality is relatively high. So really nice age structure where it's stratified. You don't have all of the bucks in one age group. You have bruisers that are 5 or 6 years old, and you have a lot of little guys running around. And I would say that hearing all of those stories from my buddies who would hunt up in northern Wisconsin versus in the cornfields of central Wisconsin, out here it seems a whole lot more like it's low density, high quality when you're in timber. And the bucks that I have seen, they're usually in pockets. Like you'll be pushing does all over the place, and then all of a sudden you get into this super greasy little canyon or a little brushy draw, and there's 3 or 4 good bucks that are all bundled up in there holding tight.
Yeah.
So if I had to say, I would venture to guess that whitetail bucks are just as much, if not more, creatures of habit as mule deer bucks. You know,
Mm-hmm.
relatively small home range. They like that area for a reason. Obviously, throw that all out the window when the rut kicks in.
Right.
And they're running around with hearts in their eyes. But yeah, I think they like certain spots for very specific reasons. And if you find them there and the food is still there, you're probably in pretty good shape.
The food's still there. I'm taking this based off of my experience last year,
Yeah.
and there's no reason for these deer to go anywhere else.
Yep. Yeah, it's I mean, I'm sure the spot, like, I don't know the specifics about it, but you've told me it's got all the things, right? They have access to quality feed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit off the beaten path down that little draw, so it gets them into some shelter where they're not going to be getting harassed all the time by people on side-by-sides and quads, snowmobiles. And obviously there's tons of water over in that unit too, so kind of checks all the boxes. And during the rut, if there's a bunch of honeys running around in there, dude, it's the place to be.
It's so funny. I remember when I first got into hunting, my buddy Jeff out in North Dakota, I was like, dude, explain to me, like, the rut. I didn't understand. Everyone, in hunting, the term rut is just thrown out there like, oh, it's not the rut yet. It's not the rut. The rut hasn't kicked off yet. And I'm like, what is the rut and when is it? I didn't understand that it was different for each animal and all these different things.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, man, say you're with your homies, your buddies, your guys. And then sometimes you're like, okay, I'm tired of hanging out with the guys. I want to go chase some girls. And then you go chase girls and you have fun with them. But at the end of the day, you want to go hang out with your guys again. And you're probably really tired because you got a lot of action and you need to rest and recover. And you're going to do that. And then you're going to be with your guys because it's fun to tell the stories and it's fun to relive those. And then by the time you're ready to go back at it, you go back at it. And I was like, wow, that was quite an interesting way of putting it and very accurate.
It's pretty accurate. I can just imagine the stories those bucks are probably telling, like this time of year, beating their way across a alpine basin. Like, oh man, there's this fine little honey I chased through that avalanche chute last year.
Right. Man, back in 86, shoot. let me tell you.
Yeah, it's true. And going back to the, like, how it all relates to scouting, I think each year, if you can kind of set yourself a goal of like, okay, I want to become more knowledgeable about this specific part of the calendar, because deer behavior and movement changes with the calendar, right? So transitional places that you might find deer in October on a year that we have a lot of snow in the high country here in Washington, those might be areas that you would typically not be scouting if you're thinking, okay, well, where would they be in a normal year, right? So I think having a kind of like a contingency plan of knowing all of the potential weather patterns that could make its way through during the season, so that you have that migration corridor that I was talking about, you have it mapped out. Okay, if I have 2 feet of snow at this trailhead or this point along the corridor, I know I need to be hunting at this elevation. Instead of being like, oh, I've got a spot across the state that I hunt if it's bad. No, just, again, know one spot inside and out, right? So if you're like, we've got a pretty dry year, not a lot of snow up top, you're going high. Have one of those crazy years like we did
2 years ago?
2 years ago where it was just insane. We're going low. Because the deer are going to get pushed by the snow. Even the biggest, nastiest bucks, they can't deal with, whiteout conditions up top.
But not to confuse people when you say going low, you're talking elevation of like general hunting. However, that snow will push those deer over ridge tops.
Yeah.
And saddles and like You're
for
not
sure.
going like completely low out of the snow, but you're keeping an eye on that area where they can still nose through some 2 feet of snow. A deer will still nose through and find food.
Yeah, absolutely. I was always taught once a big buck is dragging his junk in the snow, he's gonna dip. Does and fawns before that. Um, but yeah, it was another one of those experiences that you had to see it to reinforce it. Guys that told me, no man, when there's a snowstorm, the bucks will still be up there. They're not going to get pushed until it's deep. Like, there's no way that there's going to be an animal living back here. Well, it was like 3 years ago. We were way back in the Alpine Lakes just hiking. I wanted to check out a spot that I knew I could look up into the high country from only like 4,000 feet. So just, again, being really efficient. Only like a 5 or 6 mile hike in to be able to look that high was going to be a cool fact-finding mission. We go back in there, and there is a ton of snow where we are at like 4,000 feet. We're sitting in snow. So up at like 6,500 to 8,000 feet, I mean, there was probably 2 or 3 feet of snow. And we sat back there because I knew this hillside was always really hot with deer, and I just wanted to see, are there still deer back there? Well, I could tell through my spotter in the middle of the afternoon that there were deer all over the place because there was tracks back and forth. Which again, good pointer. If there's tracks going all over the place, typically a really good sign. If all the tracks are coming straight down in one direction, it means the deer probably dipped and you're just seeing the remnants of them.
Mm.
But this looked like there was a party up there, like deer frolicking all over the place. And sure enough, that's exactly what it was. When the sun started coming down into the basin as it was setting, it just illuminated that hillside, and those deer all came out of the timber. And it was every sort of deer. We saw a couple bucks, but the does and the fawns were still up there. So you had your yearling fawns that were, almost full grown, still with their mamas though. They're running around kicking. Deer always like do this weird play thing where they'll like get up like kangaroos and kind of box each other with their front feet or like stand on them. There are like 30 or 40 deer up there. And if I wouldn't have seen that, I would have never considered going up and trying to hunt in snow like that. So it goes to show you, knowing that corridor inside and out is crucial.
Yeah.
Because then in a year where it snows again like that, I don't have to sit there and wonder, where are the deer going to be? I know, because I've seen it, right? And you run the play.
I think one of the biggest takeaways out of this podcast for listeners is treat scouting like hunting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When you're scouting, go in silent, go in quiet, watch the wind, because the whole idea is for you to identify animals.
Yeah,
and if
it's not a camping trip.
If you're scaring them all away, you're never going to see anything.
Yep, I agree. I've run into so many guys in the summertime. I always run into more guys in the summer than in the fall. And it's always, the same conversation. Yeah, we're back here scouting for bear. We're back here scouting for deer. But they'll come up and just kind of pitch camp right off the main trail on the ridge. Glass from there. They're hooting and hollering late at night. That's not the approach, Like you said, you got to treat it like you're hunting. Get off trail. Go a couple ridges over. Find basins that are away from hikers. Find basins that are away from other potential hunters. It's not a camping trip. You're back there for a very specific purpose. And if you treat it that way and approach it like that, you have some pretty solid success. I mean, it's night and day. And it's like I keep saying, you have to experience it.
Mm-hmm.
You go back on a couple scouting trips. They're not as fruitful as you had hoped. You go back to the drawing board. Hey, maybe I should listen to Ian's tip and be like, this next time, I'm going 2 ridges over from the closest trail, and I'm going to be up 15 minutes before it gets light out with my spotter ready, my binos ready. And sure enough, the critters are pouring out of the trees. And it all clicks.
Yeah.
It all clicks. Like, you can hear so many people say it, but until you see it and experience it, it just isn't the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say for sure, treat it like a hunt. Be strategic, be efficient. That's kind of the secret sauce.
last crossover, grouse.
Yeah.
When you see a grouse on a summer scouting trip, from my own personal experience, you got to mark that because those grouse will be there
Oh, for sure.
come the fall.
Yeah. Man, I think that's probably, and I'll freely talk about this because there's never going to be any competition, but high country grouse hunting in this state is absurd. Like, there are spots that if someone said, hey, dude, we need you to go, you guys need to kill 100 grouse in a day. We'll have however many people that would take to legally do that. There are spots that I would be like, I bet you $50,000 we could go and get that done today. And there's no one that hunts grouse up there.
Yeah.
But if you like that, like, with Boone, my new bird dog, dude, that's going to be like my September. Aside from the high hunt, we're just going to be ripping ridges, shooting blue grouse like it's our job. So fun.
So fun, so tasty, and get them back for all those heart attacks they give us.
Yeah, well, that's the thing for me is I'd never really thought much of them. My first like 4 or 5 years in Washington, and then this past year when I dove headfirst into upland hunting, I was like, again, like you were talking about, being super efficient, being able to have crossover. I'm like, holy cow! I have like a dozen spots that I've either hunted deer or bear or went fishing in that were loaded to the gills with grouse that now I can throw the dogs in the truck, just make a day trip out of it, take a shotgun instead of a 50-pound pack, and just run ridges with my vest and try to shoot grouse.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's all about. You can start piecing together puzzles a lot easier by spending more and more time in more and more places.
The people who spend the most time in the woods are always rewarded.
Yeah, 100%. Yep, it's that weird mix of it's quantity and quality,
Right.
right? Like, you got to spend a lot of time, but you also have to be efficient with it. You can take someone who doesn't know what they're doing, but they spend a ton of time. They're probably going to get lucky, and it's going to start clicking. Then again, you take someone that really knows what they're doing. They've hunted various spots. They can apply what they've learned to different spots. They don't need as much time. It's quality, right? They have quality time that's spent back there. They're really strategic with what they do. So I think those are the two approaches that you can take depending on where you're at in your hunting journey. If you're a newbie, it's got to be about quantity because the quality will come as you learn. Just get out there as much as possible. And then as you start learning things, you don't have to be out there every weekend, but just make sure that you're strategic and efficient when you are.
Yeah. That's great. Great advice. How many days of field specifically for hunting do you think you spent last year?
So last year I had...
In calendar year, not just like the fall season.
Yeah, so counting scouting during this summertime.
Counting scouting.
Okay. So I typically start in like the third week of June is when most of my spots start becoming accessible. So there were 2 3-day trips in June, so that's 6. I had a 5-day trip in July for 11. I got married in August, so that kind of blew everything out of the water. But I got time in Wyoming, Region H over there. My lovely wife was accommodating enough to let us drive all the way up to the top of the spot I wanted to check out for a future hunt. And I got to scout on my honeymoon and saw 2 giant bucks in Region H, Wyoming, that I for sure will go back to. Hopefully next year. I've got enough points to draw it. So we'll throw that one in there for 12. And then as soon as I got back from the honeymoon, I was out on my first bear hunt for 3 days. Killed a bear. So that's like 15. September, we had the high hunt. I hunted 8 of the 10 days for the high hunt, split up into 2 different trips. 5 on the first, 3 on the second. In October, that was awesome because it only took me 2 days to get up and back out with my buck, so I was fortunate, but was prepared to spend 8 days for that. And then I spent 7 days in North Idaho hunting a new unit in a new spot for whitetail, just trying to figure it out. So, no, actually 2 trips to Idaho because I was there 2 times in November, remember?
Yeah.
So I was over there for, almost 2 weeks, 13 days.
So here you are. You're how many years into hunting?
Started big game hunting when I was 22 years old, and I'm 28, so this will be year 6.
Yeah, so you've been hunting just about as long as I have. You killed 2 animals last year, big game animals.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, and you could have killed more. I know that we've talked where you said you passed on some animals. That being said, look at the number of days you spent afield. So going back to the Ryan Lampers comment, he doesn't hunt unless he's got like 7 days. Well, we don't have that per se, but what we do have is those days spread out, and now we're taking that puzzle, putting it all together.
Yep, for sure.
And we're using that.
For sure. Yeah, I think, you just continue to learn and you get better on every hunt. There's always something you take away from it. And I think too, this was the first year where I had really felt like I was a little bit bummed, like at the end of my bear hunt and at the end of my deer hunt. Because prior to that, I felt like I was working a lot harder to get it done. And this was the first year where it was like, it was running the play. Like I knew I could have written down like a script of how the hunt was going to go for the bear that I killed in August and the buck that I killed in October, like literally to a T. And that's exactly what happened. There were no surprises. And it happened so fast. Killed the bear on like our first morning in there and killed that buck on the first morning back there, where it was kind of weird because I was like, that's what I've been working towards. But then you're like, but now I have to go home. Like when you typically be up there for a week learning and learning and learning and learning, you feel like you're kind of cutting it short. So just another one of those weird head games you play with yourself as a hunter.
Yeah.
You're like always wanting to punch a tag, be successful, go home. But then whenever it's time to do that, you're like, it's very seldom ready to actually get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's why taking buddies with you so that they have a chance to fill tags also is really rewarding.
Yeah.
Extend that hunt out a little longer.
Yeah, I hear you. I think this will be the first year where I'd drag a couple noobs that have been bugging me about, hey, want to go kill a deer, kill a bear. I'll probably make some time to do that for the first time, and it'll probably give me a whole new perspective on things.
See? And all you listeners out there, if you're on the Soul Seekers Facebook group, Ian is in that group, and he is a wealth of knowledge and someone who will not shy away from answering questions. I know that.
Yeah, I love helping guys because I was there. I mean, I still am there. I ask questions all the time, and I've learned that this is a space that's full of nothing but good dudes. Helping is fun. It's really rewarding to get a text or a call from someone you hooked up with a little bit of info, and they're like stoked, killed their first buck or their first bear with a little bit of intel you gave them, and that to me is pretty cool because 6 years ago I didn't know my ass from my elbow when it came to hunting in the mountains.
Totally. I love it. All right, well, Ian, any parting words?
No, that's about it, man. I'm looking forward to being on next time. We'll find something fun to talk about, I'm sure, again.
Yeah. We'll wrap it up. Ian, everyone, go holler at Ian. Ian, where can they find you?
I'm not a big social media guy, just with everything I got going on, but I am at the.ian.padron, like the tequila, Patron, but with a D instead of a T, on Instagram, or just send me a friend request on Facebook. I like to talk if you have any questions about hunting or fishing. There's usually not a conversation on either of those that I want to turn away from. So hit me up if you have questions. If you want to go fishing, want to go hunting, just let me know. I'm a friendly fella.
I love it. Well, listeners, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This has been a great reminder and a great grounding in what we're doing as hunters and how to prepare for the upcoming seasons. Be blessed, everybody. Freedom on. And as always, stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.